I want you to imagine the person you love most in the world. The person who promised to protect you. The one who saw you at 19 years old and swore they'd be your rock. Now, imagine that same person looking you dead in the eye with a smirk on their face and telling you that they hope something horrific happens to you, just so they can prove they were right in a petty argument. My husband didn't just stop loving me, he started rooting for my downfall. How do you go from building a life, a home, and a family with someone to realizing you're sharing a bed with a stranger who views your safety as a bargaining chip? I'm 31 years old, I have 2 beautiful children under the age of 4, and I am currently living a life that feels like a slow-motion car crash I can't steer away from. I'm trapped by money, trapped by schedules, and trapped by the terrifying realization that the red flags I ignored a decade ago have grown into a cage I might never break out of. This isn't just a story about a bad marriage. It's a story about the moment you realize the person supposed to be your sanctuary has become your greatest threat. I've been a long-time lurker in these spaces, listening to other people's stories while I commute in the dark, thinking to myself, at least it's not that bad. But not that bad is a dangerous lie we tell ourselves to keep from falling apart. I think I'm finally done lying. I need validation, or maybe just a place to scream into the void because in my real life, I have to be the calm one. I have to be the level-headed one. I have to be the one who doesn't break, because if I break, my kids have no one. Let's go back for a second, so you can understand how deep this hole goes. I met him when I was 19. He was 23, charismatic, and seemed so much more settled than I was. When you're 19, you think 4 years is a lifetime of experience. You think a man who knows what he wants is a leader, not realizing that sometimes a man who knows what he wants just hasn't learned how to compromise. We've been married for 5 years now, and we have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. Those kids are my entire world. But if I'm being honest, and this is a hard thing to admit, since the day we said I do, I felt a shift. It was subtle at first, like a light fading so slowly you don't notice the room is dark until you're tripping over the furniture. He started to resent me. I could feel it in the way he'd sigh when I walked into a room, or the way he'd answer a simple question with a tone so dripping in disdain, you'd think I'd insulted his entire bloodline. We've had the conversations, you know the ones, the long, exhausting 3 a.m. talks where you pour your heart out, crying, trying to explain that you just want to feel like a partner, not an inconvenience. We've had the short, clipped arguments in the kitchen while the microwave beeps in the background. We've tried to work on our communication, but you can't communicate with someone who views every word out of your mouth as an attack on their ego. Things shifted from difficult to unbearable once the kids came along. They say children bring you closer, but I think children just act like a magnifying glass. They show you exactly what's already there. And what was there in my marriage was a lot of rot. About a year ago, something happened that forced my hand. It was the kind of night that changes the molecular structure of a relationship. It was the night I gave him the ultimatum: counseling or divorce. He agreed, but not because he wanted to change. He agreed because he wanted me to stop talking about it. I was the one who did the legwork. I found the therapist. I checked the insurance. I cleared the schedules. And the whole time, he poked fun at it. He'd make these snide, sarcastic comments about how it wasn't working or how it was costing too much money. My benefits cover almost the entire cost. It literally costs us $15 a session. $15 to try and save a family. And yet, to him, that $15 was a burden he resented paying. We actually found a wonderful counsellor. For a few months, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then, she went on maternity leave. We're in Canada, so that meant a long break. We had the choice to see someone else or wait for her to come back, and we chose to wait. Looking back, that was the beginning of the end. Without that third party in the room to hold him accountable, the mask didn't just slip. It fell off and shattered on the floor. To understand why I'm at my breaking point now, you have to understand the incident that led to the counselling in the first place. It's a memory that plays on a loop in my head whenever I try to convince myself things aren't that bad. It was the middle of the night. If you have kids, you know that 3 a.m. feeling. The house is freezing, you're operating on 4 hours of broken sleep, and the world feels very small and very heavy. Our youngest was sick. Not just a sniffle, but one of those deep, uncomfortable illnesses that makes a toddler feel like the world is ending. They were screaming, the kind of full-body cry where they use every ounce of air in their lungs. I was in the nursery, rocking them, whispering, doing everything in my power to be a calm harbour in their storm. I'd been in there for maybe 20 minutes. The door swung open, and it wasn't a gentle entry. My husband stood there, framed by the hallway light, and he didn't ask if the baby was okay. He didn't ask if I needed help. He looked at me and told me to make them stop. He told me I was being rude for letting the baby carry on like that when he had to work the next day and needed his sleep. He started swearing at me. Right there, in the dark, while I was holding our sobbing, feverish child. I was stunned. I was trying to de-escalate, trying to keep my voice low so I didn't scare the baby even more, but he just kept coming. He moved further into the nursery, and then he did something I never thought he would do. He shoved me. He put his hands on me and pushed me toward the door, telling me to get out, to go downstairs, to take the noise away from him. I caught myself on the door jamb. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break a bone. I turned around, and for the first time in a long time, I said no. I rushed past him, back into the room, and told him to leave. I told him to go back to bed, to turn off the monitor like he's done 1,000 times before when he didn't want to be bothered, and let me handle my child. He didn't just leave. He raised his voice until he was yelling, and of course, that woke up our other child. I heard the cries start from the other room, and he had the audacity to look at me and blame me. "Look what you made me do," he said. "You made me wake the other one." I just kept repeating it. Go back to bed. Go back to bed. I was like a broken record. I didn't raise my voice. I was terrified that if I did, things would turn into something I couldn't come back from. Our youngest had stopped screaming and was just huddled into my chest, shaking. And then, in the sudden silence of the room, my toddler looked up at their father and asked, "Who is that?" They didn't recognize him. In the dark, with him screaming and acting like a monster, my own child didn't recognize their father. He didn't soften. He didn't realize what he'd done. Instead, he looked at me and called me useless. He told me I was a crappy mum and an even worse wife. And then he walked out and went back to sleep. I sat on that nursery floor for the rest of the night, holding both of my children, staring at the door. I debated packing the car right then. I debated driving to my parents' house in the pitch black. But when the sun came up, the apology text started. He didn't know who that was, he said. He was sleep-deprived. He was stressed. He was sorry. I told him I wasn't taking his kids away. Not yet. But we were going to talk. We had a 3-hour conversation when he got home. He cried. He said it broke his heart that our child didn't recognize him. He promised he would do whatever it took for me to feel safe. But here's the thing about promises made in the aftermath of a disaster. They only last until the dust settles. Counselling was supposed to be the start of something new, a foundation we could actually build on. And for a while, I let myself believe the lie that things were getting better. He was trying, or at least he was performing the role of a man who was trying. But you can only perform for so long before your true nature starts leaking out of the cracks. The bickering started up again, but it felt different this time. It wasn't just two people disagreeing about the dishes or the laundry. It was constant, low-level warfare. It's like living in a house where the floorboards are always just slightly greased. You're never quite sure when you're going to slip, so you spend every second of your day tensed up, waiting for the fall. I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I started watching my tone, weighing my words and calculating his moods before I even opened my mouth. I was exhausted. My life is a cycle of exhaustion. I work a job with a commute that swallows my day. 10, sometimes 10.5 hours, gone. In the winter, which feels like it lasts forever here in Canada, that commute is a nightmare of white-knuckle driving through snow and ice. I leave in the dark and I come home in the dark. My husband works 12-hour shifts on the weekends and Fridays. We're like two ships passing in the night, except one of the ships is constantly trying to ram the other one. Because of our schedules, we barely see each other. You'd think that would make the time we do have together more precious, right? That we'd want to make the most of those few hours? But instead, it just means there's no time to actually finish an argument. Everything gets left in this half-simmering state of resentment. Then came the night with the water cup. It was a couple of weeks ago. Our oldest was being a typical toddler, testing boundaries, being loud, just being a kid. My husband's patience, which was already paper-thin, snapped. He didn't just yell. He didn't just walk away to cool off. He picked up our oldest's plastic water cup and he threw it. He didn't throw it at the wall. He didn't throw it at the floor. He threw it at me. I remember the sound of the plastic hitting the floor after it grazed me. I remember the silence that followed. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your eardrums. I looked at him, and for a second, I didn't see the man I married at 19. I saw someone I didn't know at all. Someone who thought it was okay to use physical objects as punctuation for his anger. The next day, all I got was a sorry. Just one word. No explanation. No, I'm going back to counselling immediately. No ownership of the fact that he had just escalated to physical aggression again. Just sorry. Tossed out like a scrap of food to a stray dog. That was the moment I started to pull back. I felt something inside me just click shut. It was like I'd spent years trying to keep a door open against a gale force wind, and I finally just let go and let it slam. I stopped sharing my inner thoughts. I stopped trying to bridge the gap. I moved into survival mode. I followed everything I'd learned in our few counselling sessions. I stayed calm. I used I statements. I didn't escalate. But why was it always me? Why was the burden of emotional stability always resting on my shoulders while he got to be a hurricane whenever he felt like it? Then came last Thursday. We were laying in bed. The kids were finally down. Each of us had taken one, a rare moment of teamwork that almost made me feel like we were a real family again. The room was dim, the kind of quiet that usually invites intimacy or at least peaceful conversation. I started telling him about the kids' day at preschool. They go twice a week, and they love it. It's one of the few things that gives me peace of mind while I'm at work. I mentioned that our youngest's class had a little party theme day because they'd received a gift for Eid. It was a sweet gesture, a way for the kids to learn about each other's cultures. But as soon as the word Eid left my mouth, I felt the atmosphere in the room shift. It went from warm to ice cold in a heartbeat. My husband stiffened. He asked what Eid even was, and I explained it was a Middle Eastern holiday. I didn't think much of it. It was just a fact. But then he scoffed. He said we needed to get our kids out of the city because their heads were being filled with nonsense. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. I'm so tired of the narrow-mindedness, the unnecessary hate. I told him that our youngest best friend in class is Middle Eastern and that he's a very sweet boy. I thought maybe humanizing it would help. I was wrong. He started spewing this hateful, vitriolic crap. He talked about how we'd never be welcomed by their families, how they were different, how they didn't belong here. I tried to stay calm. I told him that wasn't true. I grew up with Muslim friends. Their families were some of the kindest, most respectful people I've ever known. Yeah, they had different rules. I couldn't go over if my dad or brother were home, but they were always good to me. I told him all I expect from anyone is mutual respect. That's the baseline. He didn't just disagree, he laughed. It was a condescending, ugly sound. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. And then he did something that I will never be able to unsee or unhear. He reached over and patted my leg. It was a gesture that should have been affectionate, but it felt like a threat. He looked at me and said, "We'll send you to India for a little trip." I froze. What? He chuckled again, a dark, gleeful little sound. Yes, that's what we'll do. You'll be in for a rude awakening. I stared at him in the dim light of our bedroom. He wasn't just making a joke. He was smiling at the thought of me, his wife, the mother of his children, being hurt, or worse, just to prove his point that the world is a dangerous, hateful place. He was literally rooting for something horrible to happen to me, so he could turn around and say, "I told you so." The sheer malice in his voice. It was like a physical blow. This wasn't a man who loved me. This was a man who viewed me as an opponent to be defeated, even if that defeat meant my destruction. "No," I said, my voice firm and shaking at the same time. He tried to push it. "Why not? What are you afraid of?" He was baiting me. He wanted me to get angry. He wanted me to scream so he could call me crazy or emotional. But I wouldn't give it to him. I looked him right in the eye and told him I couldn't believe him. I told him I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had married someone who wanted horrible things to happen to me just to win an argument. Someone who was supposed to be my protector, but who was instead daydreaming about my suffering. He realized he'd gone too far. He tried to backpedal, saying, "No, that's not what I meant." But I didn't want to hear it. The mask hadn't just slipped, it was gone. I held up my hand and told him I was done speaking to him. I told him he should leave. To my surprise, he didn't fight me. He got up and left. I stayed in that bed, staring at the ceiling, and the weight of my reality finally crashed down on me. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just in a bad marriage. I was in a dangerous one. Not because he was hitting me every day, but because he no longer saw me as a person. I was a prop in his life, and if that prop got broken to prove a point, he didn't care. But then the what now started to set in. And that's where the real nightmare begins. Because knowing you need to leave is one thing. Actually being able to do it? That's a whole different story. When he walked out of that bedroom, I didn't feel the relief I expected. I didn't feel like I'd won an argument or stood my ground. Instead, I felt this cold, heavy hollow opening up in the center of my chest. I stayed there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of him moving through the rest of the house. And I realized that the man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years didn't just dislike me, he was actively rooting against me. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine realizing the person you're supposed to trust most in the world actually wants you to experience something horrific just so they can be right? Just so they can see that look of, "Oh, you were right," on your face? It's a level of malice that I don't think you can ever truly come back from. He didn't care about my safety. He didn't care about the mother of his children. He cared about his ego, his xenophobia, and his need to be the one who knows better. I lay there for hours, the silence of the house feeling like it was pressing down on my lungs. I thought about that rude awakening he mentioned. He was gleeful. That's the word that keeps sticking in my throat. He was gleeful at the idea of me being traumatized. I'm 31. When I was 19, I thought I was so grown up. I thought I knew what love looked like. I saw his confidence as strength. I saw his take charge attitude as leadership. But now, looking back from the vantage point of a woman who's been pushed, yelled at, and had a cup thrown at her, I see it for what it was. It wasn't leadership. It was control. It was a slow motion dismantling of who I am. The next morning, the sun came up like it always does, and the world didn't stop turning just because my marriage had finally died. I had to get up. I had to get the kids ready. I had to start that long, grueling commute. My life is measured in miles and hours. Every single day I spend 10, sometimes 11 hours just existing for my job and the drive to and from it. When you're in a car that much, you have a lot of time to think. You have a lot of time to run the numbers, and the numbers are terrifying. I'm stuck. That's the reality of it. It's not a secret I'm keeping from him. It's a reality we both live in. We live in Canada, and if you've been paying attention to the news lately, you know that the cost of living here has become a monster that eats everything in its path. Groceries are a fortune. Gas is a luxury. Rent? Rent is a joke. I started doing the math in my head while I was driving through a snow squall on the highway. If I leave, where do I go? I can't afford a lawyer, not without going to the bank and begging for a loan that I'll be paying off for the next decade. And even if I get the lawyer, then what? We don't work in the same cities. We don't live in the cities where we work. Our lives are this tangled web of logistics that only barely functions because we're under the same roof. If we split, the house has to go. And on my salary alone, in the city where I work, I couldn't even afford a one-bedroom apartment, let alone a place with enough space for 2 growing kids. Then there's the schedule. This is the part that keeps me up at night, more than the hateful things he says. He works 12-hour shifts on the weekends and Fridays. I work Monday through Friday. If we separate, a judge is going to look at our schedules and see that he's available during the week while I'm at work and commuting. He would get the kids during the week. I would only get them on the weekends. The thought of losing those extra days with my children, it's like a physical pain in my gut. I would be the weekend mum. I'd miss the school runs, the Tuesday morning cuddles, the mundane little moments that make up a childhood. I'm not willing to lose that. I'm just not. So I find myself in this impossible position. I'm living with a man who resents me, who has shown he can be physically aggressive, and who openly wishes for my harm. But I'm tied to him by the very things that are supposed to provide security: my job, my home, and my children. I feel like I'm in a beautiful cage. From the outside, maybe it looks okay. We have a house, we have jobs, we have kids. But inside, the air is running out. I'm so tired of being the calm one. I'm so tired of being the one who remembers the lessons from counselling while he treats them like a joke. Why is the emotional labour always on the woman? Why do I have to be the one to hold the family together with my bare hands, even when those hands are shaking? I look at my kids and I feel this wave of guilt. They deserve a home filled with love and respect. They deserve to see a father who treats their mother like a partner, not an adversary. But if I leave, I risk uprooting their entire lives, putting them in a tiny apartment and losing half the time I have with them. Is it better to stay in a toxic house so they have a backyard and a full-time mum? Or is it better to leave and show them that you don't stay where you aren't respected, even if it means life gets 100 times harder? I find myself daydreaming about winning the lottery. It's pathetic, I know, but in my head that's the only way out. I'd take my half, I'd buy a small place near my work, I'd hire the best lawyer in the country, and I'd finally be free. But I'm not winning the lottery. I'm just driving through the snow, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles are white, wondering how I got here. I keep thinking back to that night in the nursery. "Who is that?" my child asked. That should have been his wake-up call. That should have been the moment he realised he was losing everything that mattered. But instead, he turned it on me. He made it my fault. That's his superpower, making everything my fault. If the baby cries, I'm rude for letting it happen. If he yells, I made him do it. If he says something hateful, I'm too sensitive or don't know what I'm talking about. It's a slow erosion of the soul. You start to doubt your own reality. You start to wonder if maybe you are the problem. But then you remember the water cup flying through the air. You remember the smirk on his face when he talked about you being assaulted in a foreign country. And you realize, no, I am not the problem. That being right doesn't pay the rent. Being right doesn't get me a lawyer. Being right doesn't change the fact that I'm trapped in a life I no longer recognize. I'm just done. I'm done trying. I'm done hoping. I'm just existing now, moving through the motions of a life that feels like a suit that's 3 sizes too small. I love my kids more than anything, and I don't regret them for a single second. But if I could go back to that 19-year-old girl, I'd grab her by the shoulders and tell her to run. I'd tell her that red flags aren't suggestions, they're warnings, and if you ignore them, they don't go away. They just get bigger until they're all you can see. The silence in our house now isn't peaceful. It's radioactive. Since that night in the bedroom, since he looked at me with that smirk and talked about my rude awakening in a foreign country, something has fundamentally broken. You can't unhear a person's desire for you to be hurt. You can't unsee the gleam in their eye when they imagine you in danger. I'm 31 years old, but some days I feel like I'm 80. I feel like I've lived 3 lifetimes in the last 5 years, and every single one of them has been spent trying to keep my head above water. My life has become a series of calculations and compromises that I never signed up for. Every morning, I wake up at the crack of dawn, long before the sun even thinks about showing its face over the Canadian horizon. I look at him sleeping next to me, the man who threw a cup at me, the man who shoved me while I held our sick child, and I feel a physical revulsion. How did I end up sharing a bed with my own personal antagonist? Then the commute begins. 10 to 10.5 hours of my day are swallowed by work and the road. When the winter storms hit, it's even longer. I spend hours staring at the grey slush on the highway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they ache, and all I can think about is the trap I've built for myself, because that's what it is. It's a trap. If I leave tomorrow, I lose everything. I don't have a spare bedroom to move into. I couldn't even afford to put a bed in it if I did. Every cent we make is swallowed by the skyrocketing cost of just existing. Groceries, gas, the mortgage, it's a monster that's never full. To get a lawyer, I'd have to go to the bank and beg for a loan, starting my new free life in a mountain of debt I can't pay back. And the kids, my beautiful innocent kids. If we split because of our schedules, my Monday to Friday and his long weekend shifts, a judge would likely give him the kids during the week. He would be the one raising them while I'm at work, and I would be relegated to the weekend parent. The thought of leaving my children in the care of a man who loses his temper so easily, who screams at infants for being rude when they're sick, it's a non-starter. I can't do it. I won't do it. So I stay. I stay and I play the part. I follow the rules we learned in counselling, even though he treats them like a joke. I stay calm. I don't raise my voice. I shut down emotionally because it's the only way to protect what's left of my spirit. I've become a ghost in my own home, haunting the hallways and making sure the kids are fed and loved, while the man I married moves through the house like a storm system waiting to happen. I found myself the other day actually looking up lottery numbers. I don't even play the lottery, but I sat there, staring at the screen, imagining what I would do with half of a jackpot. I'd take my half, I'd buy a small house near the kids' preschool, I'd hire the best lawyer money could buy, and I'd finally breathe. It's a pathetic fantasy, isn't it? That my only hope for safety and peace is a 1 in a million chance at a ticket. But that's where I am. That's the level of desperation I'm living in every single day. I know I'm not perfect. I'm sure I've said things in anger too. But there is a line between bickering and malice. There is a line between stress and cruelty. He crossed that line a long time ago, and I was just too blinded by the life I wanted us to have to see it. I look back at the 19-year-old girl I was when we met. She was so full of hope. She thought those little red flags, the way he'd talk down to waitresses, the way he'd get just a little too angry when he lost a game, the way he'd make jokes that felt like stings. She thought those were just quirks. She thought she could love him through them. She didn't realize that those red flags were actually the blood in the water, a warning of the shark that was waiting for her to get in too deep to swim back. If you're listening to this and you're seeing those same flags, please don't ignore them. They don't get smaller. They don't go away. They grow. They grow until they're the walls of your house and the bars of your cage. They grow until you're 31 years old, staring at a bank balance that says you can't afford to leave a man who doesn't care if you live or die. I don't know what the future holds for me. For now, I'm just taking it one commute at a time, one I'm sorry at a time, and one day at a time. I'm doing it for my kids. I'm staying in the cold so they can stay warm. But the fire inside me, the one that wanted a partnership and a real marriage, that fire is out. There's nothing left but ash. It's a heavy realization to come to, that your life isn't what you thought it was, and the person you chose isn't who you thought they were. But I have to believe there's a way out eventually. I have to believe that one day I won't have to look at the lottery to find a reason to hope. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you take the risk and leave, even if it meant losing time with your kids and facing financial ruin? Or do you stay and endure the slow boil for the sake of their stability? I honestly don't know what the right answer is anymore. If you've been through something similar, or if you have any advice on how to navigate this without losing your mind, please let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, where we pull back the curtain on the things people are really going through, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It helps us keep this space open for everyone who needs to vent, rant, or just feel a little less alone.